Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So it is the beginning of September, which means it is time for my August wrap up. I am thoroughly very pleased with my August month of reading, but I feel like a lot of my subscribers are not going to be because I seriously branched away from horror this month. I'm going to explain why I did, but I really needed to. So 3 of my books are my traditional horror novels and 3 are absolutely not. One is a biography that really has nothing to do with anything scary whatsoever. But yeah, that is how my August month turned out. I had like a whole plan of books I wanted to read this month that were all like summer oriented and horror and thriller, and I pretty much didn't do any of that. And I kind of blame one book in particular, and I will get into that. But let's dive into what I read this month. So first up, I read The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. I got this in one of my recent Unplugged book boxes. This was really fun. This is a Poison Pen Press book, who is the publishing company that does all of Darcy Coates' books. So I knew this was going to be like creepy and fun with like kind of a happy ending at the end, which it is all of that. However, this book is also extremely meta. I feel like this book is kind of what Paul Tremblay wanted to do with the Pallbearers Club, but just couldn't execute. Pretty much this book is told through the perspective of an author writing a novel with a friend of hers who is editing the book after every single chapter. So you get a lot of edits at the end of each section of this book, and that book is also... and those edits also tell a story within the main story. It's really cool. There's a lot of layers. It took me like 3 or 4 chapters to really get into the weird style of this story within a story, but it really benefited the novel overall. This is a fun kind of whodunit thriller. Little cheesy, little corny, little unrealistic, but still really fun. So this was a 4-star read from me. But what I primarily liked was the weird frame narrative of the story within a story, and how the kind of overarching story really intertwined with the fictional story being told, and like all of the things that unfurled because of that. I thought it was really cool. Again, very meta, very self-aware, but still really fun. And this is one of the first books that I've read that really highlights the pandemic. Like, it is very obvious that this book takes place at the end of 2019 through the year 2020, and the whole pandemic and quarantine unfurls, and I really appreciated that. Pretty much the premise of this book is a group of 4 people are in the Boston Public Library one day, and they hear a scream, and it turns out that the person who screams was murdered, and they have to solve who the murderer is. Very straightforward, fun kind of whodunit, lots of twists and turns, but what really is the highlight of this story is the weird meta story within a story, self-awareness. I think without this book could have been really flat, but because of that elevation, it added so much more to the story, and I really appreciated that. Alright, so next up, I got this when I was in London. Many of you might not know this, but I am an avid designer shoe collector. Never been super into designer clothes or handbags per se, but I'm a huge shoe person. I've always loved and adored designer shoes. There's something that I really love and appreciate and take care of. One of my hobbies is to buy like old, vintage, kind of battered and worn designer shoes and restore them to their former glory. So one of my favorite designers of all time is Christian Louboutin. So when I was at Harrods in London, I did pick up the little book of Christian Louboutin by Darla Jane Gilroy. This is an unauthorized biography of the designer, and it's really cool. It highlighted a lot of things I didn't actually know about the designer and how he became who he is today. And so this was a 5-star read for me solely because he is my favorite designer, and I just really enjoyed reading about him. As far as biographies go, is this the best written thing ever? Absolutely not. This probably could have been way more in-depth. It could have been way more friendly to the reader, but regardless, this is the first time I've ever read like a true biography to Louboutin, so I just had a real joy reading it, which is why it was a 5-star. For me, do I think it would be a 5-star to the average reader? Probably not. But learning the history about my favorite shoe designer was a huge, huge deal to me, and I'm super stoked that I read it, and I love that it comes in the signature Louboutin red. So that kind of kicked off my like need to read a lot of fashion novels this month. Again, I'm gonna get back to that after I talk about the next book, but I read that and I was like really in a fashion mood after that. But I continued to read horror, and I read the horror, I'm not sure how to say this, H-A-A-R. This is by David Sodergren. This is the first book I've read by him. I've heard very, very good things, and I do quite like his writing style. This was an interesting read. It was about like a 70-something-year-old woman who lives in a cottage on like the coast of Scotland that is in a neighborhood that's being bought up by a rich American man who is trying to turn the area into a golf course and is trying to convince our, I believe her name is Muriel, yeah, to convince the owner of the cottage, Muriel, to sell her house for a lot of money so he can build a golf course there. She doesn't want to sell the house, kind of thing. Then it gets kind of cosmic-y. She kind of meets this cosmic entity, and craziness ensues, weirdness ensues, and she kind of sort of starts to get her way with the developers. I really liked this book. I thought the first half of this book was much stronger than the second half. I liked the mystery and strangeness of it. It did start to get kind of weird, and I'm not quite sure if the landing stuck for me, so this did end up being a 3-star read. There is definitely some cosmic horror in this. The main entity of the horror is cosmic. And then there's a lot of body horror in it, which is very vivid, I would say. And I think that's where I started to get kind of uncomfortable with this. I am not the biggest into body horror because it grosses me out, which means that it's doing a very good job. So if you're into body horror, you might like this, but I did enjoy it for what it is. I would definitely want to read something by David Sodergren again, and I loved it being set in the Scottish landscape. I was just in Scotland, which I think made this so much easier for me to visualize as I was reading it. But yeah, this was really fun, very interesting, extremely creepy, a little disturbing. But yeah, really, really enjoyed this for a first-time read from David Sodergren, but didn't stick the landing, so it did drop down to a 3-star for me. But very happy it was included in my recent Abominable box. This is one of the first books I've read from a recent Abominable box, because I feel like everything else has kind of been like really indie or not something that's necessarily spoken to me right off the bat, but I really wanted to read this. I'm really happy that I did. Okay, so then I started reading Summer Sons by Lee something. I'm going to check that for you right now. By Lee Mandello. Summer Sons by Lee Mandello. I've heard a lot of mixed things on this. This book was announced, I believe, back in 2020 when I was in quarantine. I thought the premise seemed really cool. I really liked the cover, and I was really excited to read it. So I ordered it, and then it kind of sat on my shelf, and then I was like, oh, it's summer, like, we're gonna read this, it's gonna be great. It feels almost like it could be a coming-of-age story. And I got like 75, around that area, pages in, and it was such a slog and such a trek to get through. And so I paused it, and I decided to read something else instead, because I was like, maybe this is too dark for me, or maybe I need like a palate cleanser for this novel to really get into it. So I put it aside for a little bit, and I picked up The Knockoff by Lucy Sykes and Joe Piazza. This is a horror channel, so I'm sure you're like, why are you reading this kind of book? So this is a story about a fashion editor whose job is put in jeopardy by a younger millennial who comes in and tries to turn a print fashion magazine into a internet clickbait online magazine, and is very rooted in the tech world instead of the print and fashion world. Why would this speak to me? Well, I worked as a journalist in both print and online for years, from age 19 until about age 25. It is something I'm very invested in. I also worked in the fashion world for a while. I went to makeup school for fashion makeup, So I worked with a lot of fashion designers, and I worked with a lot of fashion photographers and a lot of models. So this is a world I really, really like. And for me, this was really interesting to see the perspective, because this was written by a bunch of print journalists, on how they view the internet and online magazines kind of overtaking such a popular and beloved but old medium. And so I really wanted to read this. This was really cool about just the idea of like the long form article and the like fully planned out photo shoot versus like the listicle. That's something that's like a huge reality for me. That's something that kind of literally took my career as a journalist and told me I didn't want to do it anymore, because I really hated the idea of giving up long form journalism for these kind of clickbaity articles, having to write like 7 articles a day versus like 1 article over the course of 2 weeks. It wasn't really what I signed up for, and this is a book that really, really got that. So this was a 5-star read for me, simply because I related to it so much. That being said, the absolute amount of just like plot holes and errors and just like ridiculousness that takes place in this book is just so unrealistic and unfathomable to me. And like the luck of like the main character and how she just kind of falls into all of these great situations is just very unbelievable, unrealistic. And yet I still had so much fun with it because I felt like it really, really nailed the discrepancies between print media and online media, and a world that I worked in and really loved until I no longer did, if that makes sense. My fiance also works in tech, so there's a large part of this about tech startups, which is, again, something that hits very close to home to me because I am engaged to somebody who has worked in many, many startups and now works in big tech. So I just loved this book for how much it spoke to things that I have experienced. Again, 5-star read for me, sort of like the Louboutin book, because it just spoke to so many things that I have lived through and experienced. So I just really enjoyed reading it. I didn't want to put it down. From an objective standpoint, this would probably be closer to a 3-star read, as I felt like a lot of the situations in this were very formulaic and very cliche and wouldn't actually happen in real life. But if you're into fashion and you're really into print mediums, you might, if you're really into print media, you might really like this. And the way they talk about fashion is just awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome in this. So really enjoyed that. All right, so then couldn't quite bring myself back to Summer Sun, so I decided to read What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Did get this in a recent Nightworms package. Was very excited about this. This is one of my most anticipated reads of 2022, and I do have an entire video review on this, so I won't go too in depth on this, but this is T. Kingfisher's retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's famous short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And just like it being a short story, this is a very short novel, which I was not expecting because her other novels that are based on short stories are quite lengthy. This was a 3-star read for me. I was not blown away. I felt like T. Kingfisher had an opportunity to set this in modern times and make this feel very different, yet still very related to the original text, and yet she chose not to do it. Chose to kind of do almost like a cover song that doesn't actually change anything about the iconic song it's based off of. That is what this book felt like. It's like, if you're gonna cover Smells Like Teen Spirit, why are you making a rock song? If you're gonna tackle something that famous, make it pop, EDM, dubstep, something bizarre. It's not going to click for anybody, and a lot of people are going to be offended by it potentially, but it'll be different, it'll be intriguing, it'll be something to talk about, not just a blatant regurgitation of something that's already fabulous. And that's what I felt like about this book. The main character was just too perfect. There were a lot of weird storylines that I felt like were just kind of shoved down the reader's throat in an attempt to make them fit the time period, when if we had just set them in modern times, none of this would have had to happen. There was a lot of stuff to do with like biology and mushrooms, and just kind of the right people were there at the right time to make sense of it all. I don't know. It felt very forced in this, and it really truly did feel like a cop-out after reading Mexican Gothic. If you've read Mexican Gothic, you're going to get a very similar story with this, but not quite as well done. So I was very underwhelmed with this. I didn't think any of the characters were very tangible or likable for that matter, because they were all very one-note characters. Very let down with this. Still an interesting read, so I gave it 3 stars. I didn't hate it by any means, but I was just very bored with this. So then I continued to read Summer Suns, and I just could not get through it. I believe I've determined I'm going to DNF it. It's very depressing, it's very slow, and our main character makes so many dumb and irrational decisions that just nobody in their right mind would do, that I don't think I can continue. And I know many people have told me that Summer Suns gets better as it goes on, but I just don't think I can justify suffering through it, especially since the main subject matter and focus of that novel is so depressing. And every time I would read it, it would just bring me down and bring me down and bring me down and make me not really want to read horror. Which is why I ended up picking this book up, because after trying to struggle through Summer Suns, I was just so depressed with the subject matter and how I just wasn't connecting with the book that I again wanted to read something very lighthearted, fun, and whimsical. And so I read Counterfeit, which is about 2 women. One is from China, another is a Chinese American woman, and they kind of join forces together to execute selling and conning people into purchasing counterfeit luxury bags. So like Chanel, Hermes, all of that fun stuff. Again, I'm really, really into fashion, and I found this really, really interesting and really, really fun. This is by Kristen Chen. This was a 5-star read for me. It's part of Reese's Book Club, if you care. And I very much enjoyed this. This is another instance, though, of a book that I think I read it at the right time and the right place, because I was just so like bummed out reading Summer Suns that I needed to read something frivolous and happy. So I really enjoyed just kind of the ridiculousness of this, and like the luxury and like the attention to details and branding. And I live in New York, so we see a lot of counterfeit bags come in and out of the city, especially down in the lower half of Manhattan. So it was really cool to read about where these bags come from. This had a lot of information on that industry too that I didn't know about. So it also kind of felt like a learning experience. And I just had really a lot of fun with it. And it is kind of like this like scandal, almost like Catch Me If You Can kind of story, where like the first half of the book you believe one thing and then everything flips on its head and you're like, oh my god, I didn't see that coming. So I had a lot of fun with this. And it is, again, a little ridiculous. I don't necessarily know if it would ever happen in real life. There's a lot of questionable circumstances that our main character does a lot of strange, unrealistic things. But again, almost in like a Gossip Girl sense, this was just a fun, quirky book to read. And it really pulled me out of like the funk that I was in reading Summer Suns. So again, 5-star read for me, objectively, probably closer to like a 4-star read, I would say. But very fun, and I really, really enjoyed learning about just how counterfeit bags get made, produced, brought to America, sold, and how good some of them can be. You know, I didn't realize that a lot of these bags are made with pretty much the same materials as counterfeits. So I thought that was really, really cool to find out, and I just really enjoyed this, and it was just such a good break from something that was so depressing. And I'm really, really bummed that I didn't end up liking Summer Suns, because I was excited for it. It seemed like it was going to be a really cool Southern Gothic, and it just droned on and on and on, and I couldn't bring myself to finish it, and I do believe I'm going to be DNFing it. So that is why my wrap up this month is only about half horror and then half a lot of like kind of frivolous fashion reads. But I did thoroughly enjoy all 3 of those fashion reads. Anyway, as always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays, and hopefully next month I will be back towards more mainstream horror for you guys. I'm currently reading Hidden Pictures, which I am doing a buddy read for with Blackacre Doe, and it's really cool so far, even though I'm only like 60 pages in, but really, really enjoying that, and that is supposed to be a high summer thriller, so we will see how that goes. Anyways, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!